What's up, guys, and welcome to One Take. I'm Gil, and today we're talking about Servant, Season 2, Episode 1, titled Doll. Right at the top, I'll say I enjoyed this episode and thought it was a solid continuation from last season. The show's tone often floats between mysterious, creepy, and tragic. To me, this episode felt like it focused more on the tragic, and I thought it did a good job at it. I do miss the creepy, but expect and look forward to its return. With that, let's jump into the review. First, just want to mention, if you need a refresher on Season 1, check out my full Season 1 recap. Just hit the card in the upper right corner. And if you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe for more just like it. On to the review. This episode picks up moments after the Season 1 finale. Dorothy, having found a doll in her baby's crib, frantically searches for Jericho. Meanwhile, Sean continues burning his hand. When he learns Dorothy called the police, he quickly springs to action, cleaning things up to avoid suspicion when the cops arrive. One of the biggest questions I had after Season 1 was, to what degree has Dorothy woken up? Last episode, she seemed to remember the reborn doll for a moment, and she recalled the removal of her son's body from the crib. Is she conscious of all that now? Right off the bat, it seems the answer is no. She does see a doll in her crib now, but still believes that the baby they've been caring for is truly Jericho, and doesn't seem to recall his death. The cops arrive, and Dorothy explains to them that cult leader May Markham was in their home. This doesn't go particularly well, as, according to her own reporting, May was believed to be among the dead after the standoff with the Church of Lesser Saints. Upstairs, Sean speaks with Officer Reyes, who dealt with them after Jericho's death, and we see a flashback to the day they found his body.
How many days did it guess?
3 or 4.
As I mentioned, one aspect of the show I find really interesting is the moods and tones it shifts between. Sometimes the focus is on an eerie, creepy atmosphere. Sometimes we're focused on the mystery of what's really going on. Other times the show meditates on tragedy. To me, this episode leaned more into the tragedy of losing a child, and as a result, was a pretty heart-wrenching episode. This scene was just a taste of it, but they serve a heavier helping later in the episode. Sean tells Officer Reyes that the baby isn't real, showing her the doll. Downstairs, he finds Dorothy begging the cops to do something, and he just watches silently. Then, Julian arrives. And gotta say, Rupert Grint is so good in this role. Since his intro in Season 1, slamming down tequilas, I always enjoy when he shows up. Reminds me of when Kramer shows up on Seinfeld, and you know things are about to get shook up. Sean tells him the baby is gone, and Julian says that's good. If they all deny the existence of the baby, which Natalie has agreed to do, they can wash their hands of all this. The cops won't believe any of Dorothy's claims. But they need to get the cops out ASAP before they start asking around and learn about the baptism, where many people saw the child. Upstairs, Dorothy frantically searches for Leanne's application, but can't find it, while Natalie explains to Officer Reyes that Dorothy's psyche is protecting her by creating delusions. Right now, she just needs space. Then Sean and Julian review the baptism footage and confirm they do in fact see May Markham there. Sean wants to know why May and George were in his home and what the church wants with him. Julian wants to just focus on the fact that they're gone now and move on. Natalie agrees. However, Sean insists that the baby belongs with them. It looks like we'll be seeing a slightly different dynamic going forward. Last season, it felt like Sean and Julian were conspiring behind Dorothy's back. Now, Sean and Julian find themselves on opposite sides of the debate around what to do with the child. Sean wants him back, and based on last season's finale, is starting to believe in the supernatural and believe that the child is truly Jericho. It also seems like we're delving into some murky territory of delusion versus divine. It seems clear that something supernatural is going on, so Sean is not wrong for his beliefs. At the same time, it certainly seemed like Dorothy was suffering from a delusion prior to Leanne's arrival, embracing the doll as though it were real. However, I suspect these lines will blur this season. Perhaps Leanne and the Church of Lesser Saints were influencing Dorothy prior to the events of Season 1. We do know that Leanne looked up to Dorothy for years since her interview at the Child Beauty Pageant. Dorothy snoops around in Leanne's room and finally discovers the camera Sean planted there, though she interprets it as evidence that May's cult infiltrated their home and has been spying on them. Sean allows her to believe this. I always thought the camera was an odd plotline. It made sense to me that Shawn planted it there, but it never really garnered him much useful information, besides the fact that Leanne liked bringing Jericho to her room at night. I'm curious if there's more payoff to this plot thread. Will Leanne realize it was Shawn who planted it there, or will it just be one more piece of evidence feeding into her paranoia as we see here? Then, in a stomach-turning, disgusting scene, Shawn cuts open his hand blisters from when he burned his hand and drains his wounds. Next, he finds Dorothy printing photos of May to be handed out around the neighborhood. Not wanting to draw attention to them, Shawn insists on handing them out himself so he can make sure that she doesn't. As he leaves, she reminds him they only have 35 hours to track down Jericho. After 48 hours, in missing persons cases, you rarely find anything. Outside, Shawn dumps the flyers in a recycling bin. Later, he returns and informs Dorothy he found nothing. She plays another of her news reports, interviewing members of the church in the aftermath of May Markham's funeral. One of them mentions that the church revived his daughter after she was hit by a car. Ironically, Dorothy shakes her head at this, saying,
"I don't believe anybody in this cult revived anyone. People believe anything."
Last season, one of my biggest questions was, how does this show sustain itself as more than just a miniseries? I assumed it would have to evolve in some interesting ways, and I think we're seeing that here. The show seems to be turning its attention to Leanne's cult and the Turners getting mixed up with them. At the moment, the church seems uninterested in the Turners. However, I anticipate Leanne defying church orders to bring Jericho back again, and I'm sure this will come at a cost to both her and the Turners. The Turners versus the Church of Lesser Saints sounds like a pretty different show than what we saw in Season 1, so I'm curious to see if they do go in that direction and how it plays out. After Dorothy's snooping, Shawn takes a turn looking through Leanne's room. He discovers the Bible, where she's written his name next to a verse. His attention is drawn to the title, The Test of Leprosy. One of the primary symptoms of leprosy is nerve damage resulting in a loss of feeling, exactly what Shawn is going through now, though he's thankfully avoided the disfiguring sores, lumps, and bumps that typically also come with this disease. This further confirms that Leanne essentially cursed him through her prayer and likely furthers Shawn's belief that the Church of Lesser Saints are truly in touch with something supernatural. Interestingly, he has sort of switched positions with his wife. Last season, he thought she was delusional, believing Jericho was with them. Now, she sees the church as frauds, while Shawn likely believes in their power to some extent. The next morning, Shawn asks Julian what's going on with Roscoe, since he found his car out front. And I love Julian's 180 on his PI, saying he isn't exactly reliable. Julian isn't interested in discussing the subject, and instead talks about his delicious chicken sandwich. When Shawn presses, Julian says the trail on the Church of Lesser Saints is cold. He also raises an eyebrow when Shawn refers to the missing baby as Jericho. Next, Julian checks in with Dorothy, who has shifted her search from May to Leanne. Following in Shawn's footsteps, Julian dumps the new Leanne flyers in the trash, along with the reborn doll, though he first snatches one of the doll's shoes. Gotta point out, by the way, at least Shawn had the decency to throw the flyers out somewhere not right behind their house. Also, Shawn responsibly recycled them, while Julian just dumps them in the garbage. Felt very true to character. Finally, we get to my favorite, heart-wrenching scene of the episode. Dorothy confesses that she thought Shawn would be a better father than this. His response, "You know what I thought? I thought you'd always protect him." What hurts so bad here is that we know Shawn is thinking about Dorothy leaving Jericho in the car. It was a mistake, but it's impossible for Shawn not to blame her to some extent. On top of that, Dorothy has blocked the incident from her memory, so she assumes he's referring to the current kidnapping. Then Shawn asks, what if he's dead? And he presses, asking what she would do, leading to the admission that if it came to that, Dorothy would take her own life. He even asks about the specific method she would use. The conversation is interrupted when Dorothy's 48-hour alarm goes off. She breaks down, and he comforts her. I love this scene. Shawn is cruel to Dorothy, but we understand why he would want to be cruel. We also, of course, sympathize with Dorothy. She feels guilty over both of their failures to protect Jericho from the Church of Lesser Saints. And I think there is still unconscious guilt over the original incident. A knock comes at the door, and finally, we see what Julian was doing with that shoe. He left it in an envelope with the note, "Tell no one, baby lives." So this seems to be an attempt by Julian to get Dorothy to keep quiet and prevent her from drawing attention to them. The next morning, Sean notices the doll in the back of the dump truck before it takes off. He rescues it and bathes it using the same care you would with a real baby. I don't think he believes the baby is real, but I do think he suspects it can be made real, and was made real for a time when Leanne was present. By the way, I'm ashamed to say I didn't notice the Pinocchio references earlier until someone pointed them out to me. But here we have a doll that became a real boy, we have crickets, we have the Sean puppet, and lots of splinters, as if Sean is turning into wood. Maybe he'll do a reverse Pinocchio and become a puppet by season's end. That's not an official prediction from me, but it is a theory I've seen floating around, and I thought it was fun. Anyway, that's where the episode wraps up. I was a fan of this episode and thought it was a solid premiere for the new season. I'm very curious where we go from here. I assume Leanne will return to the Turners at some point. Will she be torn between her loyalties to this family and her own family? Will this show turn into the Turners on the run from a cult? I don't know where it's going, but I'm definitely on board for the ride. With that, if you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell icon for more videos like this one, including future reviews for the rest of Servant Season 2. Thanks for watching, and see you on the next One Take.